Nigeria's headline inflation rose to 31.71% in February 2024, an indication of a strong inflationary environment. On the other hand, according to the NBS, food inflation climbed 37.92% because of higher average prices of items like bread and cereals, potatoes, yam, fish, coffee, tea, and cocoa. This sharp jump in the inflation rate underscores the challenges facing the nation's economy and the need to address the underlying factors driving inflation and restore stability to the entire economy. Let's make sense of this, and I'm being joined by the Director of Research and Strategy at Chapel Hill, Denham, Mr. Tajuddin Ibrahim, a friend of the house. Thank you so much. It's good to see you. How are you, Mr. Ibrahim?
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Mr. Ibrahim, 31.7% is what we are looking at now at the moment from this new figures, 31.70% from 29.90%. This figure shows clearly that across the board, the prices of everything is still going higher. Foodstuff, energy, and all of this. So please make us understand what this means, this figure and the difference with what we had before now.
So thank you so much once again for having me on the show. The major takeaway from the figure released by the National Bureau of Statistics is that 31.7% is the inflation number. And if we break down that number, what it implies is that we have food inflation being significantly higher, at 37.92%. And I think one way that, we should be looking at this number is to look as far back as like 28, 30 years ago. This inflation number of 31.7% is the, second highest in Nigeria since 1996. The highest that we have seen since January 1996, which is basically about 28 years ago, is 47.6%. This number of 31.7% is the second highest, and it is reflective of the higher prices of food, in particular, because food inflation came in at 37.92%. And my sense is that, if we're talking about food inflation, we should be looking at, what we are producing locally in terms of locally produced, food items. And what we notice is that those are largely speaking the drivers of the inflationary pressure that we currently are seeing in Nigeria. Because, for instance, we have seen in the past, 12 months, the prices of plantain have gone up by an average of about 129%. The same thing applies to yam, which we also produce locally. Yam prices have gone up by about 108% on a year-to-year basis. That is about 12 months ago currently, compared to the current number. If you look at rice as well, rice prices have gone up by an average about 98%, in the past 12 months. So largely speaking, those elements are indications of what, led us into this 31.7%, which is, the second highest inflation number that Nigeria has recorded in the past 28 years. And it does not look like, we are going to see any, reduction in the pressure in the immediate term. It looks like, what we are going to experience over the next, sort of 2 to 3 months before we begin to see a pullback in inflation number, in my view.
That's a bit scary, Mr. Ibrahim. But I want to ask you, we saw the aggressive move by the Monetary Policy Committee. 400 basis points is the push that we have. And we stand now at 22.75%. That's our monetary policy rate, which of course many say a negative impact on the real sector. And this seems not to be raining on inflation at the moment. How long are we going
So,
to stay? Go ahead. You get my
so
point already.
yeah, I get your point. I think, let us put it in perspective, right? If we are looking at inflation, one good thing to consider is, what are the drivers of inflation? If we are looking at it, we will realize that there are a lot of drivers. We did not just, get to 31.7% suddenly. It accumulated over time, and it is the impact of a couple of factors, such as, number one, inflation expectation by Nigerians. Number two, insecurity. Number three, the lack of storage facilities of, perishable farm produces. Number four, money supply growth. That is another, driver of our inflation. And that money supply growth, came largely because of the naira devaluation that we experienced. About 3 or 4 episodes of it in the past, in less than 12 months. Another factor for it is, money supply rising on the back of, ways and means, to the government by the CBN. Another major element around it is energy prices. So we have all these factors, driving inflation. So you have the cost push element. You also have, the demand side as the driver of inflation. So it makes sense for the Monetary Policy Committee to be as aggressive as possible to at least address the demand side of, the driver of inflation, which in this case is money supply. And if you remember, you will see that they also tightened the CRR, just so that, money supply sort of slows down significantly, to ensure that in the next couple of months, Nigeria will have stable prices of goods and services. So the 400 basis points increase in interest rates at the last MPC meeting, to my mind, is the right thing to do. That's the right way to go. And I believe that, we still even have more to go in terms of, interest rate increase, just to tame inflation, particularly, the part of it that is being driven by increase in money supply. The CBN has no other tool to address inflationary pressure but to tighten monetary policy by increasing interest rates, and as deemed fit, also, increasing the CRR to ensure that, money supply, growth is tamed. Let me give you two good numbers. Number one, we have 31.7% as inflation. A more compelling number for consideration is the growth in money supply in the past 12 months, which is 76%, which means that we have money supply growing at more than twice the rate at which consumer prices is growing. So that needs a situation where we have a slowdown in money supply growth. When we have that, then we will be thinking about, stability in the prices of goods and services. At least all those elements that are driving inflation, that are linked to money supply, will no longer be, major drivers by the time the full impact of tight monetary policy begins to reflect on price levels generally.
Many would argue that monetary policy alone cannot put any country to achieving inclusive growth. That is one. There must be the support from the fiscal side. And we see what government is trying to do in form of palliatives, support, interventions. We can go on and on. But how do you see this complementing each other? And at the end of the day, address the groaning and the yearnings of Nigerians at this time. You know what I'm talking about. When you go to the market and people want to buy things,
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. We have a situation where, the demand side of the driver of inflation is what the CBN can, to some extent, be able to control. But the cost side of it, which is, what we currently are seeing around insecurity. Because when you have insecurity, what it means is that farmers that go to their farms to cultivate crops will not be able to stay at farm as long as they should. And, the little that they produce, they will be selling at, significantly higher prices. So that element of it is cost pushed, and it requires that the government addresses, that part of it. The second area I believe, we should focus on as a government is to focus on storage facilities, for farm produces, because when you have, huge output by farmers, particularly perishable goods, they easily will perish because they cannot be stored, for consumption in the future. So there is need for the government to ensure that, that aspect is also addressed, because the CBN cannot address, that kind of a challenge. It is something that has to do with the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security. It is something that, the government has to address in this case. Another element around, what the government can do or has to do is to ensure that we have adequate infrastructure. And by that, we mean road network that will ensure that, farmers are able to transport their goods from the farm to the cities where they are consumed, with a lot of efficiency. And efficiency comes, largely speaking, from the quality of the road, which I believe, is something that can reduce the cost of transportation, and also safety on the road as well, in terms of providing security as they travel from, the far northern part of the country, for instance, to a city like Lagos, where, those foods are consumed. Another element or part of what the government can do, which I believe Lagos State is currently doing, and I think, they should be applauded, which is ensuring food security via partnership with states that are into agriculture. Lagos State is, taking some steps in that regard, to ensure that food supply to Lagos, for instance, is somewhat guaranteed. When you have such a guarantee, the likelihood of, price volatility reduces. Another element to my mind is what the government can do in terms of discounting the prices of food in particular. Lagos says, to my mind, is also, a good reference point, because we notice that they have subsidized some food items by up to 25% to ensure that the current hardship that Nigerians are feeling is reduced in Lagos State, which is a major, state in the country, given the level of businesses that go on in the state. So I think those are some of the areas that the government can look at to complement the efforts of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Those, to my mind, are collaborative.
Indeed, I agree with you. Those are brilliant ideas that would impact the people directly. Well, before I let you go today, let's review the markets together and look at all the impacts of some of these policies on the performance of our market. The market is starting the week not in green, I think it's slightly in red. But what would you say about the performance of the market in recent times? Talking about the stock market now.
So if we're talking about the stock market, I believe one thing investors have to bear in mind is that to have an efficient market, you do not expect the market to always be in green. A market that is always in green every day is a market to be worried about. It's a market to be scared about. A market should not also be in red every day, all the time. Such a market is a market to be scared about, to be worried about. But you should have a market where you have, market rallies over a period of time, and then at some point you see investors taking profits to utilize those profits and roll them to, move them to other investment opportunities, or possibly bring them in back to the market. So when you have, checks and balances, that is when you have a normal market. And I think the market has appreciated by around 40%, or more year to date. I think that is positive, and it is indicative of a broadly defensive economy. No doubt, we currently are seeing challenges as an economy. I think as a country, Nigeria, is proving to be defensive amid all those, challenges that we are seeing. And that is one of the reasons that we are seeing investors taking advantage of the rally that we are seeing in the stock market. Food businesses will always, be in the eyes of investors, and that is the reason that some of these food businesses are still the ones that investors are chasing, are buying for future earnings in terms of dividend expectations.
Honestly, it's interesting talking to you this Monday. I've been speaking to Director Research Strategy with Chapel Hill, Denham, Mr. Tajuddin Ibrahim. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Have a great week. Also, and a profitable one.
Thank you for having me. You too.